Blessings, beloveds. Anastasia, Cosmic Astrologer with you guys. Just wanting to give you guys a little tip on something that could be useful, especially if you're working with Yods, relationship astrology, Synastry. So this is a chart of a real person. I've just called the person client because naturally I want to keep confidentiality. So this is such a spectacular chart in so many different ways, but what I'm going to point to today, this particular individual has, for a start, 2 yods, a couple of T-squares as well. So it's a chart that's very heavily figured with aspect patterns. Aspect patterns do generally describe a life that's quite karmic. There's a lot of fated components to this soul's experience with the soul's intentions. So if you have a look at this chart, and now this particular individual also has what's defined as a true Yod, according to Bill Tierney, who's written Dynamics of Aspects Analysis. I often refer to his book and to his name, and I've shown that book to you guys many, many times. So if you're serious about your astrology, it is definitely worth investing in that book. Now, according to this particular author, a true Yod is when Pluto is at the apex point. Now, this is not to suggest that Yods that don't have Pluto at the apex are not operating as a Yod, okay? Just to be clear. However, there is something very, very significant, very powerful when you see Pluto at the apex. There's just something very telling about that. For a start, the Yod is heavily, the signature that describes a Yod is the energy of Pluto. It's basically a fated aspect. Now, Pluto, even in psychological astrology, connects to fate. So Pluto is the planet of fate, amongst many other things as well. Hence why the Yod is considered to be a fated aspect, and hence why Pluto is, characterizes the energy of a Yod and how that will play out in a person's life. So a Yod usually involves 3 planets. It can involve more, and in certain cases it can involve angles as well. Okay, so when I say angles, I'm speaking to the ascendant, the IC down here at the bottom of the chart, the right-hand side, which is the descendant, and the top of the chart, which is the midheaven. Those are the 4 angles of the chart. The angles of the chart, the cross of matter, are full of just powerhouse energy, right? They are literally, they hold the strongest points of energy, the angles of the chart. So when you see a planet conjunct an angle, pay very close attention to that planet. It's going to speak very, very strongly. So Yods, as I said, they could have 3 planets or more, or they can include an angle as well. In this particular chart, what I would like you to focus on is Pluto and the Moon, which are down here in the 5th house in Sagittarius. Now, Pluto and the Moon have a quincunx to Saturn in Taurus, just up here. And Saturn forms a sextile to Mars in Cancer in the 12th house. And Mars also forms a quincunx back to Pluto and the Moon in Sagittarius. So there's your first Yod right there. There is another Yod, including Pluto again, but Mars is at the apex, and I will just point out what that is. So it's Pluto Moon again, sextile Neptune, just up here on the 8th house cusp, quincunx to Mars, and Mars again quincunx back to Pluto. So the Pluto sextiling Neptune, and the Mars is the apex of this Yod. First Yod was Pluto and the Moon, quincunx Saturn, Saturn sextile Mars, Mars quincunx Pluto. Okay, so there's 2 Yods here that I've just pointed out to you. These are really, really, really powerful Yods on a number of different levels. Now, I'm not here to unpack what these particular Yods mean. The point of today's presentation is to share with you guys, when you have either a Yod in your own chart, or if you're looking at another chart that has a Yod, if you are working with relationship astrology, synastry in this case, what I want you guys to pay attention to is, say I was looking at this individual's chart and I was also looking at, say this person had a partner, and I was making some assessments about the relationship. If the other person had a planet opposite Pluto, right, which would be at about 5 degrees of Gemini, so this is synastry. So imagine another individual, another chart that we can't actually see, but imagine that there is another chart and that person has Mars at 5 degrees of Gemini, or Venus at 5 degrees of Gemini, or Saturn, or the Sun, or the Moon, or Mercury, or any planet really. But, personal planets create a very personal personality type of experience, right? What I mean by that is the transpersonal planets, which are Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, they are out of the bounds of our everyday consciousness. And when we are accessing those energies consciously, we are working at very, very different vibrational levels. Whereas when we are working with all the inner planets, such as the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn up here, then those planets hold us in the bounds of Saturn. Okay, it is all about structuring our consciousness within the bounds of Saturn. So it's a very different mode of operation when it comes to the planets, the inner planets on those levels. Although all the planets are evolving as well. Anyway, that's quite a different subject matter. But what I'm pointing to is that if you're looking at synastry charts, whether you're looking at yourself and your own partner or a potential partner, or you're working with relationship astrology, and you notice that a person has a Yod in their chart, and especially when you're talking about Pluto at the apex, this is one heck of a Yod, a very powerful Yod. Say this person had a partner, as I said before, and this person's partner had a personal planet just sitting up here. Let's just say it was Mars, for example, which is called the boomerang point, right, of the Yod. You've possibly heard that expression. If you haven't, check out one of my other videos where I actually point to, it was Whitney Houston actually, who had a boomerang Yod, which basically means that this Yod that you see here, imagine that Venus, because Venus does sit on that boomerang zone, however, she's quite far away from being in an opposition to Pluto, so it's a little bit too far. So pretend that Venus was 5 degrees of Gemini, then she would be right at that zone that's called the boomerang, right, which would be another planet in this configuration of the Yod. But I'm not talking about that today. I'm talking about if this person had a partner and one of their personal planets via synastry made an aspect to this Yod by sitting in this boomerang zone here, that would essentially describe an incredibly karmic relationship and connection between the two people. So the person who had, let's just stick with Mars via synastry, at this point of this person's Yod in this birth chart, then this person's Mars pretty much activates this entire Yod, right, within the relationship. So there has to be a relationship for this Yod to be activated, because there could be thousands of people on the planet that have, or more, much more, that have, you know, a Mars in 5 degrees of Gemini, or a Venus, and obviously there's going to be many, many people, but will this person come into contact with this person that we are looking at today? Not necessarily. But my point is that the soul that does interact with this soul that we're looking at today, the indication is that it's quite a fated relationship that will trigger off this entire Yod, activate it, and it will play out within the relationship of the two people. So that's really all I wanted to share today. Just a quick astro video. This is a very, very important point, though. It's very powerful. So it's definitely valuable and worth observing and looking out for, because you can learn so much just simply from observing these things in real people, in other words, people that you know or people that you're working with. It's one thing to look at a chart and you don't know the person at all, you are making educated guesses, or you're hypothesizing, or whatever the case. But when you are actually working with an individual, or when it's somebody you know, then you can absolutely observe through correlation, okay? Because you can observe what's happening in the person's life and draw the correlations accordingly, depending on what's reflected in the chart. So I'll leave that with you guys to ponder on if it's not something you've considered. And if you have any questions or comments about this, or if you actually have made some observations about this, I'd love you guys to share them in the comments below, just for the benefit of everybody who's engaging and connecting and listening to these presentations, because the more you guys engage, the more you learn from each other as well. We all learn from each other. So yeah, please feel free to leave any questions or comments below. And I will see you guys very, very soon. Much love and blessings. Bye for now.